Salve, amice, ego sum Publius Virgilius Maro. Oh, I'm sorry. You do not speak enough Latin for me to tell you everything in Latin, although I have heard you know some. I am most commonly known in English by the name Virgil, and I am most famous for the writing of my epic work, the Aeneid. And today I am here to tell you my own story and a little bit about my book. But first, I must give you the context of which I am a part, for my history shaped much of who I am and of what my book became. I was born in 70 BC, just as the Roman Republic came to its end. Just before my birth, Spartacus, an escaped gladiator, had led other gladiators out of their gladiator camps and into an open revolt. It had turned into such a problem that the government called in Crassus and Pompey, two of their best generals, to take care of the problem. Pompey unfortunately became sick just before the battle, but Crassus was able to crush the slave revolt, demolishing the hopes of the escaped gladiators and gaining much glory for himself. He had beaten him and then cruelly crucified 6,000 of those slaves along the Appian Way. Several years later, Pompey was set forth to take care of the pirates in the Mediterranean, who had become quite a problem. By dividing the entire Mediterranean into quadrants, like a graph, he was able to pinpoint and demolish all the pirates in the area and get rid of them. Meanwhile, or shortly thereafter, Julius Caesar was sent far from Rome into the distant reaches of Gaul, bringing his armies with him in what became known as the Gallic Wars. There he fought for many years against the Gauls, subduing the lands of what today are Switzerland, France, and Belgium, and making them submit to the empire. And when he returned, he brought back with him an extremely loyal army, who had been by his side for the last 7 years in battle. During this period of time, these three men, Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, had formed what became known in later history as the First Triumvirate. They had met secretly together to try and take over the Roman Republic. Now, the Republic had been built with the intention of not allowing anyone to take too much power. But these three decided to work together so that they could continue to get themselves elected as consul throughout the years and support each other in various ways. And thus, they were able to secretly rule the Republic. Then, in 53 BC, Crassus, invading the distant land of Parthia, over in Persia, died in battle. Shortly thereafter, Julius Caesar made a fateful decision. Pompey had told him that he might not bring his army back across the Rubicon River. The Rubicon River was the dividing line between where Julius Caesar was coming from and Rome, and by bringing his army across the Rubicon, he was essentially declaring war on Pompey. Fatefully, in 49 BC, Julius and his army crossed over the Rubicon, a decision that they could never return from. Pompey, in fear, fled for his life to Greece, where he later fought with the armies of Julius. And after being defeated by his armies, Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was met by Cleopatra and her brother, the Alexandrians. And they, hoping that they could please Julius Caesar, decided to behead Pompey and send his head in a basket to Julius. Julius did not particularly desire that this would be the case, but he was glad that his political enemy, Pompey, was gone. Julius then returned to Rome with his victorious armies and declared himself dictator for 10 years. Now, the position of dictator had traditionally given power to one man for 6 months in the case of an emergency. His taking of power for 10 years was a clear grab at a king-like position. Other senators in the Roman Republic became concerned, and in 44 BC, on the Ides of March, he was assassinated by his best friend Brutus and other senators who killed him, ironically, at the very base of the statue of his old enemy, Pompey. With Julius Caesar gone, the game changed. Two of Julius Caesar's most close companions, Mark Antony, who was essentially his right-hand man, and Octavian, who was his adopted son, fought against the conspirators Brutus and Cassius, who had murdered Julius. In the battle that followed over in Greece, Mark Antony and Octavian were victorious and killed the conspirators, thus taking power to themselves. They decided, after removing these, that they would split the empire between them. Mark Antony chose to go to Egypt, where he fell in love with Cleopatra. Octavian decided to take Rome. In 31 BC, Octavian and Mark Antony fought at the famous naval battle of Actium. After the Battle of Actium, which was lost by Mark Antony, he and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, where they together committed suicide, leaving Octavian to rule the empire. Octavian then declared himself Caesar Augustus, Emperor of Rome. Augustus means revered one, and he was essentially declaring himself to be the god of Rome, and setting new standards for the Roman Empire. And it is really at this point that it ceased to be a republic and became truly an empire. And in 19 BC, I myself, Virgil, died. Now, a little bit about me. I myself was not born a Roman citizen, but was born in Mantua, north of the Po River. It was then a province that was ruled by a proconsul with an army. And it wasn't until 49 BC that Julius Caesar granted citizenship to myself and others like me. A later historian, Suetonius, tells that I was tall, with a dark complexion. I'm pasty right now because it is winter, but I had a dark complexion, and that I had a rustic appearance. Rustic. And that I spoke slowly, like an uneducated man. But I could be quite eloquent when I was reading, and upon reading my work of the Aeneid to Octavia, I actually made her weep at the part where I told of her son's death. My two most famous books that I first wrote were the Eclogues and the Georgics. The Eclogues were essentially pastoral poetry. Pastoral, meaning that they were poems about love affairs, singing contests, and rivalries between shepherds in the hills. Pastor means shepherd, and pastoral is talking about anything that refers to the shepherd life. Pastoral poetry tells of the wonders of shepherds on the hills, and pastoral paintings paint beautiful green scenes where shepherds might tend their flocks. These poems that I wrote used Homeric hexameter, which was the epic meter, but they were writing about very non-epic material. Homer wrote about battles and wars and great courage of heroes, whereas I wrote about the simple contests of shepherds, which was unusual for that particular form of poetry. In those eclogues, I also wrote of a prophecy that a son of God would be born to men and rule the earth. And later this was interpreted by Christians as a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ, which is why my works became so well known and held true even as Christianity took over. I myself not being a Christian, but my works pointing ahead to what was before me. The Georgics were another of my famous bits of poetry, and these were poems about farming. At that time, we had many soldiers returning from war who had fought with Julius Caesar, many who were needing to go through rehabilitation. And the Georgics were an idealized idea of soldiers turning into farmers as part of their rehabilitation process. Now, it's more of a work of art than really a manual about farming. I didn't really write that much about the specifics of farming, but it was a beautiful picture of what could be possible in helping the soldiers to return from battle and get over some of the horrors that they had seen in war. Now, the Aeneid was something that I never actually was able to finish to my full satisfaction. I worked on it for much of my life, from 30 BC to 19 BC, 11 years devoted to this great work. And I was traveling to Greece in 19 BC, hoping that I could spend 3 years revising the work. But I met Caesar Augustus on the road, and he persuaded me to return to Rome, and on my return, I had a fever and died.